Welcome to the Rustic Garden Homestead.
Hi everyone, today we're going to answer 10 questions on tomatillos, tomatoes, and peppers. You ready, Gary?
Yeah, let's walk through the
Let's get
garden. Question number 1 is from Shannon D. Cannon, and it's about tomatillos. I would like to know some tips on growing tomatillos from seed and general maintenance for tomatillos during the growing season. These were actually purchased from a store, but they would grow from seed just like tomato plants. You just start them 4 to 6 weeks early because they grow really fast. Tomatoes take a little bit longer, and then you get to move them into the garden when there's no frost and it's warm. There's 2 plants in here. You want to grow 2 plants to help with, the fertilizing of the flowers, and you can see all the different flowers in here. And for feeding, I just set up the soil with an organic 5-5-5 fertilizer, granular type, and I water them every 10 to 14 days with a water-soluble fertilizer.
They're super easy to grow. I've grown them in California also. They actually grow like a weed, so I would highly encourage you planting them. You can see down here is, a lot of people ask, how do you know when they're ripe and when to pick them? Here's one that is not mature. If you squeeze it, you don't really feel much of a tomatillo, so you want to pick it when the tomatillo fills the entire husk. The fruit itself is inside this little papery thin husk. Now down here is one that is ready to pick, and you can see the fruit when you squeeze it is really filling the husk out here. So these are absolutely delicious, don't you think, Gary, with the salsa verde?
Go ahead and open this one up.
Oh cool, okay. Let's open it up and you guys can see. Almost looks like a green tomato, but it's super firm.
And great in salsa.
Yeah, and so you would just boil these and make your salsa verde.
Yep, sometimes I even use them raw. I like them raw too.
Oh, cool, I've never had them raw before.
Yep. And the second question on tomatillos is if they get super leggy, they grow like weeds like Kim was saying, do you need to, prune them back? Can you bury the stems? You probably don't have to do that because they are going to take off even if they're leggy, they're going to start filling out, but you could remove some of the new growth, put it in water, they'll root out, you could replant them. Definitely. You could probably drop a stem into the ground, it will also root out and it will make, for more plants. But they grow really, really fast when that heat comes. If you're concerned, trim off the tops, more shoots will come out the sides and you'll have a nice bushy tomatillo plant.
Definitely. I even grow, when they're like overgrowing the space that I have, because I have a lot smaller growing space than you do here, I've even trimmed off some of the shoots at the bottom just to keep it kind of contained, or even grown them in a tomato cage and then put a stake in the middle to kind of support them as they get taller.
These are going to outgrow your tomatoes to 10, 12 feet tall. And you can bend them, you can do whatever you want with them really, just keep them growing.
Question number 3 is from Catherine Sink, and she asks, how do you keep tomato blossoms from dropping when the temperature is over 95 degrees? I'm in zone 9A and we had snow in March when tomatoes are usually in the ground. So there's really 2 questions here. What do you do in the heat and what do you do in the cold? So I'll let Gary answer the cold question since he has a lot more colder weather than I do in Southern California. Now tomatoes really do have trouble with blossom drop once the temperature gets over 90 degrees. So what I like to do in Southern California is use shade cloth. It's really a lifesaver. That will really help keep the tomato plants growing and producing in the heat. So what I like to do is just throw some shade cloth over my plants. Doesn't have to be a super fancy permanent structure. You can see that Gary has these stakes here in his tomato bed, and you can just take your shade cloth. You can use a 40% on up to like a 70% shade block and just throw it over the stakes to really cover your plants. Now the other thing you can do if you don't want to purchase shade cloth is you can look in thrift stores for sheer curtains, something that will allow some sunlight to come through, and that way your tomato plants will keep producing in the heat. Gary, do you want to take the cold weather question?
Sure, and I do want to add too, you said 40 to 70% shade cloth, which is perfect. If you're in a really hot area, go with the 70% shade. That means it'll cut out 70% of the sun. And if it gets somewhat hot, go with the 40% and just try it out, and it's not too expensive.
Right. And then you do want to take the shade cloth off if the temperature is going to drop like in the 80s or the 70s to allow the full sun to come through.
Exactly. And if you're in a zone where you have a shorter season, you get frost, you get cold, you want to use something like this. Again, I go to the thrift stores. These are about $1 or $2. They're just bases. Turn them over, and this will create a nice way to protect your plant from 32 degree to really 28 degree weather. And so I'm able to get my transplants into the ground. I just set this next to it in April, and I watch the weather, and if it gets to 39 degrees, I don't mess around. So if it drops under 41 degree, this goes on top of the tomato plant, and it'll allow you to start growing more early in your zone.
Then you take it off during the day when the sun comes up, right? So your plants don't fry under there. How do you handle that?
And I actually did some experiments. You do want to take it off if it's warm, but it actually, because the glass is thick, if you forget and leave it on, it's not going to overheat like I once thought it was going to do. So you got some room for protection. Question 4 is from Jamie Reynolds 3. He said, you mentioned spraying your tomato leaves with organic water fertilizer. He bottom waters, and he wants to know if there's a benefit to using the soluble fertilizer as a foliar feed and watering the leaves.
I really feel like there is. I know it is kind of an individual choice, but I really feel like the leaves do absorb the fertilizer. It makes them nice and green, keeps them healthy, and I really love to use the worm tea because it really does have all that beneficial bacteria, all the microbes, all the good stuff that really helps keep your plants healthy. So do both. I water at the bottom. I also, every couple weeks, will take my watering can and just dump that worm tea all over the leaves of my plants just to really help give them that little extra boost.
Insoluble fertilizer and soluble fertilizer can be confusing if you're just starting with gardening. We're talking about soluble fertilizer, which mixes with water, and it's immediately ready for the root system and the leaves, so the plant can pull it in right away. Insoluble fertilizer is the granular type that you put in the ground. It's organic too, but it takes some weeks for the microbiology to break it down and get to the roots, so the roots can pull it in, so the tomato plant can pull it in. So the water soluble is just immediately fast acting.
Question number 5 is from Rish Galal. How do you choose the varieties to grow in your garden every year? Any favorites? Which ones are the most disease resistant?
Very good question. There's probably thousands of different tomatoes that you can select. Right in here, I have a collection from All America's Selections, and part of what they do is they find tomatoes that do well basically all over the place. They're bred to have great disease resistance. So to answer your question, look for tomatoes that in their description tell you they have disease resistance for the diseases that may pop up in your garden. I also keep a list of the tomatoes that do well in my area. That's the other tip. For instance, I grow a black cherry and a Matt's Wild that does really well in our humid environments on the East Coast. So you're going to go through trial and error. Some tomatoes will fail, just get rid of them, try some new varieties, and that's how you can figure out what grows best in your space.
That's what I was going to say too, is just experiment every year with different varieties and talk to other gardeners in your area and find out what they like to grow. Go to your local garden centers and ask a lot of questions, and even join an online gardening community like Garden Coast to Coast on Facebook and ask people what they like. So a couple of my favorites, I like to grow dwarf tomatoes. They don't have quite as large of a growing space. Like the Tiny Tim is a great dwarf tomato to grow. You can grow it in containers, you can grow it in garden beds. And I'm really kind of soft-hearted towards the yellow tomatoes.
Right.
So I look like the Golden Jubilees. Anything that's yellow is a nice sweet flavor. So just experiment and find out what your preferences are and what works best in your area.
You're going to be able to find all kinds of different colors and shapes. Just pick what you like and what looks good to you. Okay. Question number 6 is from Matt V, and he asked, when growing indeterminate tomatoes in containers, do you single stem prune? Do you let the suckers grow? How do you manage the size of the plant? Now this is a indeterminate variety growing in a container. It has not been pruned yet. So I'm going to take you over and show you a plant that's been pruned up a little bit. But what you want to start thinking about is removing some of the leaves from the bottom to let airflow go through. That's going to depend on where your garden is. On the East Coast we have a lot of humidity, so I want a lot of airflow coming all through here. Lots of leaves inside of here. You may be removing them. And the short answer is you don't have to prune, but you're going to prune for the plant to have its size contained and for it to really manage the diseases and insects that come in your area. Let's go over to the other plant. So this is an indeterminate tomato, and I just want to explain the difference if you're just getting started with tomatoes. Indeterminate means this tomato variety will continue to grow and grow and grow until disease kills it off or frost takes it. And this may get 6, 8, 10 feet tall. So those are the plants you want to prune. The other type of tomato is a determinate variety, which means it'll grow from the ground, get to about a set height, stop, the flowers form, the fruit produces, and then the plant dies back. So you don't have to really prune the determinate varieties. Let me show you some of the pruning that I would do on this plant and explain what's going on. First of all, single stem pruning is you have a single stem coming out of the ground, and then you can see this actually split. So I'm growing this as a double stem. But as it was growing, I would cut right here, remove that, and it's just one stem growing all the way up through up the stake. And what that allows you to do is control the size. And that's really a personal choice based on what you want to do. You also want to cut out the bottom leaves. You want to do this slowly over time so that you get about a 10-inch, 12-inch barrier, and that just lets air circulate through here. Don't do it all at once. Don't shock the plant, and you're just creating a nice prune and managed plant. Although this is in the ground, this could be growing in a 7-gallon container or larger, and that's how I would prune and manage my plants.
Question number 7 comes from Sally Alonso, and she asks, will more than one pepper plant do well in a 5-gallon bucket? I have a very small growing space and I would like to grow as much as I can. And my answer is absolutely yes. When you're growing in a small space, you really want to maximize your space, grow in every inch possible. And there's a great example of that here at Gary's garden. He's got a long row of 5-gallon buckets. These are just recycled pots from the nursery. He planted a lot of trees, saved the pots. And in each one of these containers, he's got several pepper plants going. This one right here, you can see it has 2 plants in it. And perfect example, look at the peppers here. They are doing beautifully. There's a ton of peppers in here. So what you want to do when you're growing in containers, and really the key to maximizing the productivity, is keeping them well fertilized. So in my containers in Southern California, I like to fertilize about once a week. He's got these sunk down into the ground here, but on a deck or a patio, keep them well fertilized and you're going to get a lot of production. So the other thing about peppers is, especially in containers, you really want to give them some type of support. These are just supported with a small tomato cage, but he also has several that are staked up here for support, and that way they don't flop over, because once they get loaded down with peppers, they're definitely going to flop over. Give them that support to keep them healthy, keep them up off the ground, help protect them from the insects and the pests, and you're going to be sure to grow a lot of peppers in your small space.
Question 8 is from John Cotero, and he asks, why do hot peppers take so long to get going, but when they do, they go crazy? They grow crazy. Is it temperature? So here's a habanero, and you can see nice large leaves. The flowers are just coming in now. We're into the first week of July, but there's no fruit yet. Up higher is a pepper that's a little bit larger, been growing longer, and you can see that the peppers have already started to form. And he answered the question correctly. It's temperature. Generally speaking, the hotter peppers, habaneros, ghost peppers, everything with really, really high Scoville units, really high heat, just need the heat. Once the heat comes, they're good to go.
Absolutely, those hot peppers really do love the heat. Now question number 9 comes from Shayna, and she asks, my sweet pepper leaves are curling upwards. What is the cause of this? Well, we don't really have any curling pepper leaves here in this garden bed, but if you were to see this in your garden, the pepper leaves would be simply curling upwards like that. And that's really nothing to worry about. It's just nature taking its course in your garden. You don't need to go crazy and spray your peppers with anything or prune off the leaves. It's just nature taking its course.
Question number 10 is from Nicole Santel, and she says, can I use leaves people put in their leaf bags for mulch in my garden? And the answer is yes, but there's some things you have to really pay attention to. Herbicides. People use them all the time on their lawns, and if you go and get the bagged leaves, the bagged grasses, you have a chance that you're bringing chemicals into your garden, and if you use them as mulch, the rain's going to wash that. When you water, it's going to wash the herbicides into your plant, and it's going to damage your plants. So if you're going to collect leaves, you want to make sure, I think, that you're getting them in the fall when people tend to stop spraying chemicals on their lawn, and be cautious if you're going to pick up the leaves in the spring when people are spraying the lawns and collecting leaves.
Right. Now in Southern California, people do tend to spray their lawns year-round. So I actually have some friends that collect leaves from their yard for me, and that's pretty much all I use for mulch in my garden because they're readily available. So a friend of mine will collect his leaves and then shred them up, bring them over in bags, and he doesn't have any grass clippings or anything like that in it. And it really works great, as I'm sure you might do here, to spread a couple of inches around your plants. And we really need the help with water evaporation in SoCal, and that really does help, so you don't have to water your garden as much and your plants don't dry out. So leaves, yeah, a really good free resource for mulching.
Just make sure they don't have herbicides, and talk to your friends and let them hold them for you.
Well, Gary, thanks so much for having me in your garden. It's been a ton of fun to answer some viewer questions.
Thanks for coming down. And if you check our community tab on our YouTube channel, we're going to be asking for questions from viewers for future episodes.
So comment below, let us know what tips you learned. I really hope you found it helpful.
Thanks so much for watching.
We'll see you on the next video.
Hi, my name's Gary.
Hi, I'm Kim from the Rusted Garden.
YouTube garden intro, take one, and action.
Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. Hi, I'm Gary from the Rusted Garden.
And I'm Callie Kim.
And today we're going to take you through the garden, answer questions on tomatillos, peppers, and tomatoes. Maybe if we can do that again.
But basically, once tomato plants, or once the temperature hits 95, I'm in zone 9A, and we had snow in March when tomatoes are usually in the ground. That's a great correct.
Some room for protection.
Great. Fertilizer on my leaves because the leaves really do help. Oh, let's try it again. Sorry. Thanks, Gary. Well, question number 6. Oh, number 7, dang it. Absolutely, absolutely. It's just simply nature taking its course in your garden. You don't need to go crazy and prune off your peppers. Don't worry about it.
That was so good, you were right there.
3, 2, 1. Thanks, Gary.
Hang on, there's somebody in the background.
Oh, sorry.